I like the idea of 4X games, even though very often they're large, big monsters that take a long time to play and to learn. They're mechanically cumbersome. Often they also had to do with sci-fi, which I enjoy, but I prefer fantasy setting better. And there are, of course, also fantasy 4X games. One such game is Hyperborea. A couple of nights ago, I went to a game night and people had set up. No, you're not mistaken. This is not a review for Hyperborea. This is just an intro. I went to a game night and people had set up a game of Hyperborea, beautiful, large fantasy game, and I didn't play, but they gave me the gist of the game, and I saw it's a game that looks pretty heavy to play. Not so much to learn because the mechanics appear to be straightforward, but there are just so many actions that it seems that the burden of choice would be pretty heavy before you learn how to combine the actions and do what it is that you're trying to do. After they played part of the game, not a full game, we set up a similar game, in essence, which is another Fantasy 4X game. This one being Tiny Epic Kingdoms. See? I was getting there. Tiny Epic Kingdoms is a small fantasy game, which is a 4X, with all the 4X that you have in other 4X games. You have expand, attacks, and other 2Xs. And so you can do your thing. You start from your little home, little country, your small little home land, and you gain new lands, increase your population, develop magic, develop research, build stuff, and also you invade and attacks other players. But the title, as you can see, is oxymoronic already. Can a game that is tiny, both physically and in terms of rules, the rulebook is pretty short, can the game be epic? Can there be a tiny 4X fantasy game? After playing the game, I think I can answer that question. Let's see. Players in this game control races. Each player has a fantasy race, indicated by this card here. Each player gets one of these cards at the beginning of the game. As you can see, you have a lot of possible races, and they do play very differently from one another. And this is because of the research tree that each race has. Players will invest in magic research, and as they develop new knowledge in magic, they will gain new abilities, and of course then players will want to play in different ways because they will want to exploit as much as possible the specific abilities of their race. All races have a track here which is used to record the amount of resources that the player has. So you use those three markers that move on the track during the game when you acquire new resources or when you spend resources. The resources are ore, mana, and food. Looks like a banana, but we are pretty sure it is corn. I like to think of it as a banana. Each player also has a starting land, a homeland. Homelands are represented by these cards here, which are double-sided. So you receive one at the beginning of the game, and you can choose whichever side you want to use. You put it in front of you, and you receive 2 meeples, your initial population, which you place in any one area of your homeland. As you can see, there are different types of terrain. There are forests, mountains, plains, and there are some special terrain, such as that one is a city, and another type of special terrain is the ruins. You also have a tower. At the beginning of the game, you place a marker there indicating your progress in the building of the tower. One last thing is I'm showing you how you set up the game. You have this marker here which indicates your progress in the field of magic, and you place it under your magic book, your spell book, at the beginning of the game. The core of the game is really this card here. The game revolves around the action card and around these 5 shield tokens, which are pretty much action tokens. What happens is that when it is your turn, you pick up one of the shields and you place it on the card by one of the actions. So you reserve that action, or better, you decide that that is the action that is going to be performed, possibly by all players, this turn. After you select that action as the active player, you have to take that action, if that is possible at all. The point is that you cannot choose to do something else. If you're the non-active player, you can choose to perform the action that was just selected, or you can choose to collect resources instead. You collect resources based on the number of lands that you control. Each land in which you have a meeple will give you 1 unit of a specific resource. For example, forests will give you mana, and mountains give you ore. The number of meeples that you have in a region doesn't matter. It is simply the presence of meeples in a region that matters. Also, there is a very strict stacking limit. You may never have more than 2 meeples in the same area. 2 meeples of any color, which also means if you have 2 meeples of your own in an area, then opponents cannot come in to try to take it from you. They cannot attack you because no one can get in there. So a good thing is that all players are always engaged, because in a sense it is always your turn. There is the active player who chooses which is the main action that is going to be performed, but everybody gets to make a decision. Everybody gets to either perform that action or collect resources, so that's pretty great. Let's have a look at the actions. If you select that action, or if that action is selected, then you can do research in magic, which is you can spend mana points to advance your marker on this track here. And the cost in terms of mana is simply the number written by the level that you're trying to reach. And you have to reach each level sequentially from the bottom to the top. So at the beginning you spend a point of mana and you get the first level of magic. Later, when the action is selected again, you may spend 2 mana. Later, the action is selected again, you may spend 3 mana, and so on and so forth. And meanwhile, as you advance in your research, you gain benefits, and some of these benefits are really, really sweet. As for this action here, it allows you to expand your population. So you spend food to expand the population, and you need to spend an amount of food equal to the number of meeples that you're trying to reach. That is, if you're 3, you can add a single meeple, go to 4. If you're 4, you can go to 5. You have to add no more than a meeple per action. So if I have 3 and I want to go to 4, it will cost me 4 foods. If I have 5 and I want to go to 6, it will cost me 6 units of food. And 7 is the maximum amount of meeples that you can have in play. The tower, when the tower action is selected, players may spend ore to improve their progress on the tower. The idea is the same as you have for magic and for expansion. That is, you spend a specific amount of points to increase your presence in that field of the game. At the beginning, you spend a single point to place your marker there, then you spend 2 ores, get there, 3 ores, 4 ores, that's it, that's it. Remember, you can only advance 1 level per action. Trading actions, well, no, actually it's not trading actions, it is trading resources. If that action is selected, you can relinquish any number of units in one resource and replace it with an equal amount of units in another resource. I could drop 4 food and get 4 mana, or drop 2 ores and get 2 mana or 2 food, something like that. I kept these 2 actions for last because they are the ones that may be a little more complicated because they trigger combat. In reality, they're not all that complicated per se, but the game becomes a little more involved, but also more exciting when it gets to combat. This action here is to patrol, which simply means to move within your own homeland. That is, you can move a meeple from one region to an adjacent region. That my action. Next time I want to patrol, I could do something like this. Very simple. When all of the shields are on the card and it is your turn, the first thing that you do is that you clear the card, and then you get to play your turn. You get to select your action. So if you are late in the turn and it is your turn to clear the card, that's great because you have a free and full selection of actions again. The action we haven't mentioned again is that one, which is Quest, which allows you to move one of your meeples from an area on the edge of your card to an area which is on the edge of of another card. For example, from there I would be able to move into the homeland of another player, but I wouldn't be able in this case to reach this area here. If this is the region I'm trying to enter, I would have to go from to enter from one of the edges. And movement, be it patrolling or questing, can trigger combat, which happens when you enter an area that contains meeples belonging to another player. Suppose that this is the movement of the orange player. Hooray! Combat is going to be triggered. Now, when you trigger combat, each of the players involved receives a d12, which is a special d12 because number 12 is replaced by a white flag, so the die only goes to 11. What happens? That players simultaneously and secretly decide the amount of resources that they want to commit to the war. So you cannot have more than 11. So you're pretty much deciding how many of your resources here you're going to spend. And this is how worth each resource is when the war starts. Mana, each resource, each point of mana that you spent will result into 2, let's call them combat points. Each ore that you spend will result into a single combat point, and food is of no use during combat. Suppose that this is my situation. I decide that I want to spend 5, and 5 is all I'm going to commit to this battle. Then this is my selection. You may also have bonuses that come from the abilities that you have developed through magic research. When both players have selected their action, selected their amount of resources, they reveal the results and they compare them, and the highest result wins. The player that loses the battle is forced to leave the board. Oh no, suppose the purple lost. And the player who wins simply gets to stay there. So after you revealed and after you resolve, you do have to pay for your war expenses. Both players have to pay for whatever amount of resources they committed. Doesn't matter if you lost or won. In case of a tie, it is the defender that wins the fight. There's also a chance, however, that players are able to strike an alliance. Both players may choose the white flag, in which case, if they reveal their dice and both the dice have a white flag, then there is indeed an alliance and both players get to stay in the region. And if one player has a flag, meaning one player offered peace and the other player is attacking, then the player with the white flag loses the fight. And sharing a territory through an alliance can be very beneficial. The tricky thing is that you have to trust your opponent, because if you commit to offer peace and the opponent commits to, but that doesn't do so, then you will lose a fight and the opponent will win a fight, most likely without even spending a lot of resources. If the opponent assumes that you indeed are going to offer peace, that is to spend no resources in that fight. The end of the game can be triggered in one of 3 ways. If a player has 7 meeples in play, or if a player has built all 6 steps of the tower, or if a player has reached the top of the magic research tree. In that case, you complete the turn and then you score final points. Players score a point for each meeple that they have in play, with an exception. There's a special terrain, ruins. If you have a meeple in there, it doesn't count for final scoring. Then you get 2 points if you control a capital city by yourself, and only 1 if that is controlled by an alliance, that each player there gets a victory point. You have a point for each level of magic that you reached, and you also have points for the tower, as indicated by the little number in the crown on the level of the tower in which you are. Which means that the magic is less profitable, but you have an immediate advantage because you get the benefit, but 5 levels of magic will give you only 5 points, as opposed to the tower, which doesn't give you benefits during the game, but gives you more points at the end, because 5 levels of the tower mean 7 victory points at the end. and 6 levels. Well, that's pretty sweet. 10 victory points at the end of the game. As you can imagine, after you have tallied points, the player with the highest score is the winner of the game. Usually, or often, we say that a game kills another game when we play a certain game and then we find another game that does something similar, does it better, in a leaner form, in a friendlier form. Tiny Epic Kingdom has killed a game that I've never played, because as I was learning about Hyperborea, I was interested in the game. I wanted to learn at some point and maybe own a copy. After I played Tiny Epic Kingdoms, I don't know that I need another 4X fantasy game, because this one does everything that a 4X game is supposed to do, and does it so well, and in such a mechanically sound and interesting way. The selection of actions clearly is the very core of the game, and it presents its own range of challenges and decisions that you have to make. I like the fact that you're always involved, that you may not be the player that selects an action, but you always can follow the leader or the active player in taking that action, or you can try to collect resources. Unless, of course, the active player selected an action in such a way that it's bad timing for you, because maybe you want to expand, but you do not have the right resources right now. So the other player selects the action, which is beneficial for him, and forces you to wait until the game goes around and the turn track is clean and the action card is cleared before you can take that action. So there are many levels of interaction. The obvious one is the one that you see, that meeples expand and move around and multiply and fight. But then there is a subtle but really key element of interaction, which has to do with the timing and manipulation of the selection of actions. That is extremely important. Finding the right time to take the action that you need, trying to deny powerful, useful actions to the opponent. That is really interesting and exciting, and it is so simple. You can teach the game so easily, and yet it does all that you expect this type of game to do. It is packed with meaningful, key, relevant decisions. You're always short on resources. There are always more things that you can do, that there are always more things that you want to do than you can actually do. And there's another matter of timing, which is, whoa, I can build a powerful tower, or I can get the research in magic. I'm going to spend a lot of resources, which means that I'm depleted in resources, and I can be attacked by another player, and the player knows that I cannot defend myself effectively at that moment. Maybe I'll try to back for an alliance, and the player may choose to give me one or not. And maybe, even if I am at a disadvantage, I play things diplomatically, and I've been devious and tricky enough that the player that could defeat me militarily decides to choose an alliance. And I break the alliance before it is even formed, and I win. So many angles, so many nuances and things that you can do around such a small game, and such a small range of options, so you can learn it very easily, and yet there is depth and definitely strategy and tactics that emerge from this. I just love it, and I love the potential replay value. These races play in such different ways. The lizard folks that have all sort of abilities related to moving, the undead, they recycle stuff. They turn certain things into others, and they turn them into resources for themselves. The merfolks, which are the mermaids and the mer dudes that interact with water. They can pass through impassable streams of water. They can get resources from water. The elves that they don't seem to be starting very strong, but they develop powerful magical abilities later. Just a lot of options. Just playing with different races and experimenting with the races that you have, I think, is going to keep this game fresh for a long time. Frankly, everybody loved it. It was the first time that we played the game. Everybody was in love with it after like one turn. Once we saw the potential that emerged from such a simple engine, from such a economic engine, this game immediately skyrocketed in my mind to a very high place in the possible hypothetical ranking of games that they played lately. I filmed a lot of videos about best games of this, best games of that. It's January 15, 2015, and I can tell you this is the best game of 2015 so far. I can confidently tell you this is the best game I played in 2015, with the exclusion of Shadows of Malice, which is really good. As of now, they're both interesting enough fantasy games, but one is 4X, one is adventure. I wouldn't be able to compare them actually because the scope and the philosophy behind the game is so different. They both do incredibly well what it is that they're trying to do. Tiny Epic Kingdom gives you a game that you can play several times in a night, but it's more than a filler, definitely more than a filler. Maybe an extended filler, maybe not a huge monster, nor is it supposed to be. But it's a game that you can play probably in an hour, a little bit more, a little bit less, depends on your group. Depends also on the number of players. With 5 players, I was afraid maybe it would take a little too long, but the game scales well with the fact that you are always involved in the decisions that you had to make. You're always making decisions, always selecting to take an action or to get resources, always doing something, unless the opponents time things well so that actually you're stuck and you lose a turn or two, which you don't do much, which can be absolutely tragic because there's still a limited amount of times in which you can perform actions and you can collect resources. If an opponent goes ahead, then you could potentially have the runaway leader problem, because if a person collects 5 resources every time and the other player only collects 2 or 3, then that player is going to be a huge disadvantage. The player with 5 resources each time can inflict a big hit against the small guy and then immediately replenish his resources to defend himself against future wars. But at the same time, players can gang up against the leader. And a leader may be very strong and easily defeat a small kingdom. If 2 people go against a single player, that single player, no matter how much advantage the player had, is gonna be shaky a little bit after that. Great game. Intense interaction. You always have to keep an eye on what the players are doing, both in terms of where the meeples are and the terrain that they control, but also their resources, their magic. Intense interaction, immense replay value in a game that is enormously playable and incredibly fun to play. This game has killed Hyperborea for me, even though I never played that game, and I just think that there are many other 4X fantasy games that I don't need to learn anymore, and I don't feel the need. I don't feel the need to explore the genre further, because at least for now I have one that really scratches that itch, and it does it incredibly well. And with different terrain to try from game to game and different races, I think this game is going to effectively scratch all of my fantasy 4X itches for quite a bit of time.